too. Call 1-800-748-5218 today.
Hi, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in the East on a day of soaring tributes for an American giant, a revolutionary, a mentor, a leader, a real one. Today at the funeral for John Lewis, a crowd gathered in his memory. Among them, 3 living presidents, Donald Trump's 3 predecessors, gathered together despite their political differences and any personal policy disagreements to celebrate a man whose legacy transcends politics. Their presence together, a reminder of a day gone by, but not necessarily lost, when decency and compassion stood above partisanship, at least on a solemn day. Together, their words today sending a pointed message to the country at a moment that the country is at a crossroads in honor of the good and kind and gentle John Lewis.
We honor that memory today because as a child he learned to walk with the wind, to march with others to save a tiny house. Because as a young man he challenged others to join him with love and dignity to hold America's house down and open the doors of America to all its people.
Listen, John and I had our disagreements, of course. But in the America John Lewis fought for, and the America I believe in, differences of opinion are inevitable elements and evidence of democracy in action.
You see it in people trying to be better, truer versions of ourselves. And that's what John Lewis teaches us. That's where real courage comes from. Not from turning on each other, but by turning towards one another. Not by sowing hatred and division, but by spreading love and truth. Not by avoiding our responsibilities to create a better America and a better world, but by embracing those responsibilities with joy and perseverance, and discovering that in our beloved community, we do not walk alone. What a gift John Lewis was. We are all so lucky to have had him walk with us for a while and show us the way.
As you listen to the 3 former presidents, I just want to point out that on your screen is a live picture of the burial of Congressman John Lewis. For President Obama's part, he was just getting warmed up, and we'll play for you in a moment his searing indictment of Donald Trump's America in just this moment. But first, as if to underscore the magnitude of the nation's loss in losing John Lewis now, his own parting words in an op-ed he penned just before his death to be printed in the New York Times today on the day of his funeral. Here's some of them. Quote, "Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting into what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. You must also study and learn the lessons of history, because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements stretching across the globe, because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can do to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love, and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it's your turn to let freedom ring." That's one hopeful vision of America. But the path John Lewis has laid before us is one of two before the country at this moment of unprecedented crisis. In the news today, 150,000 souls lost to coronavirus, 150,000 Americans deprived of a mom or dad or a brother or sister or a child. Economic despair that many Americans have been feeling for months, evident in the data now, too, and a forecast of record decline in the GDP, no respite from unemployment. 30 million Americans don't have enough food to eat, according to one report today. And the President of the United States, a president who did not show up to pay respects to John Lewis this week, began the day by taunting democracy herself, by threatening to delay the election in November, suggesting, even as the virus ravages much of the South and Midwest, where Trump should have plenty of supporters who just might want to vote for him by mail, that all mail-in votes are somehow invalid. Donald Trump and his tragically botched mismanagement of the public health crisis, his bitter complaining this week about people not liking him, the smug performance of Attorney General Barr on topics ranging from foreign election interference to federalized police forces are on the menu in November, if that's your thing. More of that is one option, but in his final words, John Lewis challenged us to choose the other. Two Visions for America is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Professor of Journalism and Politics at Morgan State University and contributor for The Griot, Jason Johnson. Also with us, Kimberly Atkins, senior opinion writer for the Boston Globe, New York Times political reporter Nick Confessori, and the host of MSNBC's Politics Nation and president of the National Action Network, the Rev Al Sharpton. Let me start with you, Rev. Your thoughts on the day.
I thought it was a great tribute to John Lewis. I was blessed to have known him. I think he would have been pleased. And I think that what was pleasing is that each one of the three presidents that spoke, and President Obama giving the eulogy, challenged us to really continue to not only fight for what is right, but to maintain what John Lewis gave his life for. To be in a time where the voting rights bill that John Lewis shed blood for has been neutered in terms of Section 5, and there's a pending piece of legislation on this named after John Lewis, and we can't even get Mitch McConnell to bring it to the floor. And John Lewis stood with Black Lives Matter murals and stood with all of us fighting the question of police authority, and we have the George Floyd police justice bill that McConnell won't go forward. It was important that these presidents stand and say what they said about continuing. And clearly when all of us rose this morning and saw John Lewis had written his own message that he wanted the New York Times to publish the day of his funeral, it charged us. So as saddened as I am to lose someone I looked up to, I grew up in the civil rights movement. He was about 15 years older, so he was one of those that mentored my generation and that I was able to work with and march with. That was a sadness, but it was also challenging that we get this legislation through because, as President Obama said today, you must mix protest with politics, and politically, we must have this sum of activism be something to achieve legislation. That's what John Lewis was about. That's why everyone stopped. I must say quickly, though, in contrast with that, not only did President Trump not join in the funeral or join in mourning Lewis, he chose this week of mourning Lewis to come out and just outright support using the language of housing discrimination and telling people, I'm going to keep them out of your neighborhood, and we know who the them are, where your property values won't go down. And he also chose today, the day of his final funeral, to say we ought to delay the vote. And John Lewis was about voting and about people having equal access to housing and mortgages and all. So he not only did not in any way show the kind of sensitivity to John Lewis, whether he agreed with him or not, he decided to use it as a time to really take a shot at the things that he stood for, which I think is repulsive and shouldn't be done to anyone. Herman Cain passed today. I disagree with Herman Cain, but I would respect him and his family and regard him in his absence. It takes a very sad and sick politics to choose this week to do what Donald Trump did while we are memorializing John Lewis and what he stood for.
Jason Johnson, it's like staring into the sun. I think that's also something Donald Trump is guilty of at the moment of the eclipse, to process and to hear what the Rev is saying. But it is the truth that while we have a live picture up of John Lewis being laid to rest, the other headline today is that Donald Trump has put some policy proposals behind his racist tweets about the suburbs this week. That is the news. And if we're going to stare into the sun of what he is and what he does and how he divides this country, it needs to be said, as the Rev just said it.
Yeah, and what made me very happy on a really sad day is seeing that the men and the women that spoke at Congressman Lewis's funeral, they didn't separate the sadness of his personal passing from the policies that he fought for, right? They didn't ignore what Donald Trump is doing and how that is a violation of everything that John Lewis stood for. When President Obama spoke, I mean, it started off as a subtweet, and then it turned into a full indictment of this current administration, whether it comes in the form of state-sponsored violence, whether it comes in the form of housing policy, whether it comes in the form of voting. He went after Trump. He went after Brian Kemp. That was one of the beauties of today. I think all too often when great leaders pass, there's this push. There's almost a fear or reticence that, well, we just want to talk about the person. We don't want to talk about what they fought for. No, we have to talk about what John Lewis is fighting for, because we have an administration that is trying to take all of his accomplishments away and rub it in our face. And that was one of the more meaningful parts of today, even though we're still in this struggle.
You know what? I want to play that, and I want to ask you one more question on the other side.
George Wallace may be gone, but we can witness our federal government sending agents to use tear gas and batons against peaceful demonstrators. We may no longer have to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar in order to cast a ballot. But even as we sit here, there are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run-up to an election that's going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick.
If former President Obama delivers this message and it gets through to enough Americans, I think it will have a sizable impact, not just on the presidential election, but on the fate of the Senate races. No reasonable person wants to live in that America that he just described. I mean, and you're right. Funerals used to be a day to put aside politics. The politics are now front and center. And the way we honor those we've lost is by delivering an urgent political message. You are so right, Jason.
Yeah, and the other thing, Nicole, that was really moving, if this was a sports movie, you know, this is the talk. This is the talk at the beginning. This is right after Rocky's coach dies. This is after the guy who's inspired you to do this, and your coach comes in and he looks down at first and he tells the whole team, look, we've got 98 days. We've got 98 days to make this passing something meaningful, to make it something we can all rally around. I was extremely pleased to see the president bring that level of passion. And it was an encapsulation, not just of everything that John Lewis talked about, but as you mentioned, Nicole, Bill Clinton and George Bush, they built up to this. Both of those men admitted, hey, we may have had occasional ideological differences, but the fact of the matter is we have to fight forward for the dream that John Lewis was talking about. And that I believe that this is going to be a rallying cry going forward. And I hope that it's going to be what we need to push back against attacks on the Postal Service, attacks on voting places, and quite frankly, a president who, by saying I'm going to try and delay an election, he may not have the constitutional power to do it, but I don't trust Republican governors throughout this country to not try and enact that and mess up the votes on a local level.
Kimberly Atkins, I thought one of the more effective uses of George W. Bush's speech, first of all, it was clear that the reverence he had for John Lewis, and to showcase that, I think, added to the fabric of Lewis's being a giant, being this incredibly important figure in our story as Americans. But he also talked about, and I was there for this, reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act, which passed unanimously in the United States Senate and with very little opposition in the House. It's a sign not just of how much the Republican Party has changed, because they're all represented by Republican voters, but of how much this country has changed, that that isn't something with unanimous bipartisan support, and it's not changed in good ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very recent history, Nicole, as you put out, that the Voting Rights Act and reauthorizing it was a bipartisan. It was a bipartisan priority that no one even second guessed. It was always reauthorized by a clear margin every year, and it was only after the Supreme Court gutted the core part of it and really took away the obligation of the Justice Department to guard over and make sure that the right to vote was protected, that suddenly Republicans walked away from it. The Congress could have immediately implemented a new rule that put the teeth right back into the Voting Rights Act, and they've refused to do so. And so I think on this day, as we all are talking about the juxtapositions between the remembrance of Congressman John Lewis's life, as we saw played out, to the attack on democracy, frankly, that the president's tweet today represented an attempt to try to hold on to power at the expense of democracy. Yes, you're right that this is important in terms of the Senate elections, but the members of the Senate, particularly Republicans in the Senate, have power right now. They can call for strengthening the Voting Rights Act. They can, in the next coronavirus relief bill, send money to cities and states in order to shore up election security, to help them carry out voting, including voting by mail, in order to keep people safe from the coronavirus. They can, instead of just saying, no, the president doesn't have the authority to delay an election, they can condemn that, because what the president is trying to do is scare people. He's trying to scare his own supporters into disbelieving the results of an election. He's trying to scare other people from trying to vote. And the Republicans in Congress have all sorts of power right now to fight against it. And this is the moment that they will be judged by their actions between now and the election.
Nick, I have been building up to like a 13-part question for you, but I'll try to get it down to a 2-part question. One, if you could pick up on Kimberly's point about the Senate, it was a rare day. And again, you know, I'm the last human who's going to throw a parade for any Republicans expressing disapproval of Donald Trump for threatening to postpone or cancel an American election. But that did happen. And two, you've covered the Russian efforts to sow division and delegitimize our democracy. What's left for the Russians to do if Trump is tweeting his own sort of messages to delegitimize the American election? Maybe they don't do it because they don't have to. Trump's done all their work.
Well, the great power of the Russian operation in 2016 was not the tweets and retweets and Facebook shares that the Russians themselves got, but their ability to be amplified by real people, real American voters and groups. So to have the president doing their work for them is in some ways a great intelligence coup. I'm not sure they could get a better bully pulpit or messenger for their idea that American democracy is flawed and unreliable and corrupt, which is, of course, their message. So I think, look, I'm thinking about George W. Bush's speech there. And as you were pointing out, he was the high watermark, really, Nicole, of a Republican Party that believed its future lay in winning the votes of minority Americans, Hispanics, blacks, even African Americans back in the Bush era. And Trump is the high watermark of a party that looks to essentially build its future on white fear and reaction, on diminishing white vote, and on the vision of the country that is not optimistic, but is really based on the idea of diminishing returns and holding on to what you have for as long as you can. And in that sense, it is deeply pessimistic and fundamentally at odds with the vision of Presidents Obama, Clinton, Bush, and John Lewis.
There are no 4 people on this planet who I would have rather have talked to about this extraordinary day of news. Jason Johnson, Kim Atkins, Nick Confessori, and the Rev Al Sharpton, thank you so much for starting us off. When we come back, signs of life for the rule of law today, despite efforts by Attorney General